last speaker is coming up. We do have Marina Miller. I want to welcome you. She's the Senior VP of Operations. Um, would love to just throw it to you, get started. Go ahead and start sharing your screen, and Marina, I will hand it over.
Perfect. Sounds great. So I'm going to be talking today about, how do you architect an organization that functions with high psychological safety and trust? Because, as probably many of you on the call know, psychological and trust completely change every interaction that people have. There's a lot of science and evidence behind it as well that essentially shows that an interaction can be completely different when trust is present versus if it's not. And so, how can leaders foster that? And that's what I'll be walking through. So the first, I think, is investing in regular feedback. And there's a couple of components that I want to talk through. I think, like, first, what does feedback do? Why is it important? Why would you invest in it? Feedback ideally can be a non-event, right? It doesn't have to be a big moment where you send someone an invitation or an email that's like a big bomb of information, and a very serious event. Ideally, it should just be hey, I observed you do this, as fresh in the moment as possible, and constructive as well, and have and if you can do this within a 24 to 48 hour period from when something positive or constructive that you saw happen, it is really, really high trust building and can completely redefine a relationship. I think, like, when someone is delivering feedback in a situation that's not a high trust situation, so maybe somebody that you're nervous to give feedback to, or that you're going to have like a difficult conversation, I think, the first thing is to ensure that you're delivering feedback directly to the person and not going around them and having them hear it from someone else. If you're questioning and if you're asking yourself, should I even share this feedback? Ask yourself, why? Why do you want to share this feedback? Is this something that this person needs to hear and it will help them on their team or in their career? And the answer is almost always yes. But if you're not sure how to proceed or you feel uncomfortable sharing the feedback, something that I have found to be really effective is actually to, write the feedback down, sleep on it, possibly share it with a person that you trust. If you have like a people partner in your organization that you work closely with, your lead, another person that you have trust and confidentiality with, and get their take. The other thing with giving feedback is that people process information in different ways. Some people are auditory learners, others are visual. And it can actually be helpful when, especially establishing a new relationship, to ask a person what is their preferred method of receiving feedback before giving it. Do they want to see it in writing first, have a chance to process it, and then have a conversation? Alternatively, do they want to hear it live first? And really avoid giving it over Slack or like messaging in that way, pretty much wherever possible. The other thing that I wanted to talk through is, like, what are different forcing functions to make sure that you are giving feedback regularly. At the end of the day, as much as we can talk about how important it is and how to do it, sometimes time just gets in the way, work gets in the way, and you realize it's been, 2 months since you've given somebody feedback. And a practice that I like to encourage teams to do is to do feedback, which is basically like lightning feedback, and doing it at least 3 times a year. And essentially, in the setup, people request ahead of time, who are the top 2 or 3 people on their team that they really want feedback from. Ideally, it's somebody that they've been working closely with. And people actually prepare the feedback ahead of time, so it's thoughtful and actionable. And then actually, go around sort of like lightning speed dating style and give the feedback back and forth. And I find when you have that scheduled, and you have regularly 3 times a year or so, it sort of it's that catch all, right? Like it's that it it ensures that you're giving it even if you've fallen behind on your goals and sharing feedback. Cool. The next thing that I wanted to touch on, in terms of building high trust relationship, is doing it through one-on-ones. I think one-on-ones are a fantastic way to build a relationship, to understand another human being, what motivates them, what do they care about, how do they work, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and actually just also like socially build a full and deep relationship. And when you have that, I find that like the psychological safety and trust that builds is really solid. And so what why have one-on-ones? I think probably everybody on this call is familiar with them and regularly has them. But ideally a one-on-one is a place where you have a high trust conversation with open-ended questions and actually cover everything from personal to professional issues. And they should build rapport, they should develop working relationships and solve problems early and help increase motivation. Oftentimes it's easy for a one-on-one to turn into sort of like a status update. And I find that really detracts from the quality and from the intent. So some general principles I want to share, to make sure that your one-on-ones are as successful and effective as possible is, beyond time, constantly prioritizing something else, email, other meetings. It can send a signal to a person that this particular one-on-one meeting is not as important to you as other things. And to that end, it's okay to cancel. Things come up, but if you're canceling often, the signal again that is sent, intentional or not, is that time is not valuable. So if don't hold one-on-ones that you feel are strictly mandatory with little value. It's actually refreshing if people both acknowledge like, hey, we're actually okay right now, we don't need this touch point. The time can be spent in other ways. That said, if you're working to build trust, like you should prioritize it, and you should not cancel, and you certainly shouldn't cancel regularly. The other thing that can be really effective as a general principle for one-on-ones is to actually change the setting here and there. Occasionally go for a walk and have your one-on-one, go get coffee. Most often it's probably easiest and most efficient to, either dial into a VTC or just grab a meeting room. But every once in a while, it's really helpful to just change the setting. I think it can really actually like change someone's mindset in the way that they approach a conversation as well. The other thing too, in terms of like setting it up, is I think leads should always give a direct report the floor up front to set the agenda, to set the topics and make sure that whatever a person is, top of a person's mind is discussed and not saved for the end and you potentially run out of time. The other thing that I have found really helpful, particularly if you have a lot of direct reports, is actually keep a separate doc on every person that you have one-on-ones with, and actually take specific notes on what you're discussing, what you promised to follow up on, what you agreed to look into, or an action that maybe they were going to, you both committed to them taking the next time that you talk. And then when you have that, it's a really easy reference point to make sure nothing's lost in translation. Huge for trust building. It's also really helpful actually for any type of performance reviews or anything else like that as well. So something else that I have found to be helpful, particularly if you have a lot of direct reports and you might not have all of the time in the world to spend equal types of time with them, is I found it helpful to actually categorize direct reports and people in different categories, and think about them and actually approach the investment and the time in their one-on-ones differently. And this can change over time. Somebody can be a high investment, high growth person at one point, and go to steady state at another point in their career. But essentially, high investment, high growth peeps, these are people that you find most energizing that also have a high growth slope. Or it could actually be a new person that you're onboarding that's in a 30, 60, 90 or whatever similar phase. And for that group of people, I find it most effective to actually have our one-on-ones be 45 minutes per week instead of 30. And that for one of our monthly one-on-ones to be focused on growth only and actually like, call it that when you schedule it. And then performance management peeps are sort of, similar level of investment for a different reason. These are peeps that you also need to invest a lot of time into because maybe you need to get them to a performance bar or in some cases an exit outcome. This also usually requires weekly syncs and a lot of work to think through, write up, and maintain. Uh, Steady state peeps are people that are doing well and at this moment don't have a particularly high, growth slope at this moment. And so with them, I tend to meet on a bi-weekly cadence for 30 minutes and have the growth conversation at sort of a normal cadence, 1 to 2 times a year. Low investment peeps are people that you are actually not the right person to grow, and you should find a new lead for them. Like if you find that you have nothing to talk about and you're dreading your conversations, you should actually think about like, are you the right person to be growing them? And ideally you don't have any low investment peeps that you're working with. Talked about this a little bit already, but I think it's really important to actually just do when you're starting a relationship with somebody and you're starting a one-on-one series with somebody, to do the upfront setting and calibration. Set the expectation that both you and the person you're meeting with will come prepared with an agenda to discuss, including active problem solving, and that it's not going to be a status update conversation. I mentioned turn one of the one-on-ones into a monthly career coaching chat and have it labeled that way when it's scheduled, so that it's not even a thing that you have to necessarily think about. It's already there on the calendar. And I like to say commit to the Lettuce Pact. I'm not sure if folks on the call are familiar with what that is. But essentially, the Lettuce Pact is a commitment that we all agree that we're going to tell each other when we have lettuce in our teeth. And so the Lettuce Pact is exactly that, where sometimes feedback can be awkward. Sometimes it's more comfortable to sweep it under the rug than embarrass someone. But that said, the Lettuce Pact is, an agreement that, when you talk, you are in a psychologically safe space and that you can share anything. And that, goes both ways from lead to a direct report and direct report back. If someone is doing something that they would really benefit from hearing about. Cool. So then there's the actual like one-on-one itself and how to essentially work through it. And so oftentimes you come into a one-on-one and maybe you do have the agenda and you've done all of the setup and prep that I've talked about. But as it's happening, I often find it helpful to actually categorize like what is this one-on-one falling into, and what does this person need from me for the one-on-one to be successful. And so there's there's the update, which we talked about. So it's like, these are my projects and these are my people and this is how it's going down. And so when a one-on-one starts and clearly is an update, and if you can't get out of it despite any of the prep, this is where I do start listening actually twice as hard for a nugget of something we could actually like discuss, investigate, and explore for the conversation to be as productive and helpful as possible. There's also the vent. Sometimes that happens. This is essentially a therapy session at work. This most often comes in the form of a direct report being pissed about something. And in this scenario, when I identify that it's the vent, I just listen and not actually do anything. I don't necessarily offer advice or problem solve in that moment. I realize and I recognize that sometimes a person just needs to be heard. And then there's the disaster, right? They're freaking out. They're going to quit. this is an advanced form of the vent. And again, oftentimes people don't want a solution; they want to be heard. But after the fact, I typically ask for permission to engage in help making it better. And I might not troubleshoot in that meeting, but I might schedule a follow on to figure out what we can do. Similarly, I think what I have found to be really effective in one-on-one meetings when someone is coming to me for advice on how to solve a particular problem, I think to really foster growth and trust uh, before just giving an answer, before saying, here's what I would do or here's what I've seen before, actually ask them what they think. Give them the opportunity to come up with a solution and share something on their own, and work off that whenever possible. Cool. So last topic that I wanted to cover that's a little bit different than the one-on-ones, moving away from that. I think to create and maintain really just like that trust and safety that we've been talking about, and having a positive culture that where people want to stay and want to work. Um, really believe in a best idea wins environment. And so what do I mean by that, and how do you foster that? I think the first is, in any scenario, begin with first principles. So first principles is the act of boiling a process down to the fundamentals that are true, and building from there. And so when you're at a fork in the road with a person working on a problem, and it's hard to know where to go, something that helps everyone get back on an even playing field is to go back to those first principles that you agreed on. What is the problem that we're solving, and why are we trying to solve it? Why did we decide to approach it this way? And start from that even foundation. The second is to really owe it to have a system to be able to gather ideas. And so ensure that team meetings have agendas that list all possible ideas for a problem, and foster a discussion where ideas are best, and put a transparent plan of implementation together. Essentially enforce a culture that says, your ideas aren't just appreciated, they're necessary, and have that system enforcing function to always solicit them. The other thing, I kind of mentioned this earlier a little bit when we were talking about feedback styles, is understanding humans and their learning styles. So, even with a systemization of idea gathering, more introverted people may not feel comfortable speaking up, or they may feel overwhelmed by more dominant personalities. And so make sure that they are given the floor to deliver an idea in a way that makes them comfortable, so you won't miss out. And I think, to do that, in one-on-ones and in relationship setting, it's important to ask those questions. It's important to understand what that is for different people, so that you can be prepared to empower them and enable them to share ideas in the ways that they feel most comfortable. I'd also, empower and implement the best ideas, and actually augment them with, a technical mentor when an idea is the best, but the implementation suggestions still require work. So, sometimes somebody may have an idea that works for the problem that you're solving, but their solution isn't quite right. Rather than shooting them down, actually partner with somebody stronger than them, and help them iterate on a more tractable and realistic solution. I think it's also important to have safety for crazy ideas. How leaders respond to crazy ideas and how they respond to feedback, I think will really determines how safe people feel to speak up. And people should be, as a lead, you should be upfront about your own failures, and be open about requests for dissenting opinions, and grateful when people take the risk of offering it. Last couple of things, always assume positive intent. Positive team cultures aren't really defined by constant consensus. That's not possible. They're marked by candor and respectful conflict. And I think, teams that seek to constantly improve their performance and individual skills, that doesn't happen without frank discussions and lessons learned about changes that are needed. And so always walking into every conversation with the belief that people are doing the best they can with the information they have can really just change the dynamic of a conversation and a discussion. The last piece is foster connections. Research suggests that when people report having friends at work, they're more engaged, more productive, more innovative. And in addition, fostering social connections actually creates a team mentality. When people connect with and care for others in an authentic way, they're much more likely to put the needs of a team above their own ambitions, and much less likely to act in a selfish or serving way that degrades the culture of a team. And so having the room to foster those through, one-on-ones is one of the ways. Different social activities and team building exercises is another way. Always saving space, even in team meetings, to catch up on, not non-work related things is also another way. I talked about this a bit, but make it safe to fail. And so something that I've led often is when something goes catastrophically wrong, we do something called a blameless 5 whys. And essentially you start with the first question of, okay, why was there an outage? And people work to answer that, and then, kind of ask the next level why question. And the intent here is it's blameless. We're not looking for a person to, hold accountable or to, find a shortcut to why something bad happened, but actually to, as a group, just understand what went wrong, where we failed together, and, how do you prevent that in the future. Additionally, I think to make it safe to fail, it's important to actually, when you're discussing why something is hard, why somebody has some kind of roadblock, asking questions like what's blocking your progress can actually just help people better communicate their needs. And when possible, offering brainstorming options and having other leads collaboratively pitch in to help often. Once you do that often enough, this actually just turns into like the standard and the norm, and people can operate that way even without you facilitating that. TIFU, encourage a culture of today I effed up in team environments. Be honest, open, and transparent. Something happened, you made a mistake. What did you learn? What you'll do differently next time, and make it safe to make mistakes and learn from them and grow. I'll pause there. I've been talking at you all for about 20 minutes. Happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Thanks, Marina. Yeah, we do have a couple questions for you. I do want to kind of hark back on some of the points you made in your presentation, because this happens a lot. You called it a disaster one-on-one. I love that term. A question that kind of popped up in the chat here. What if I'm the problem in that scenario? Should I bring someone else in? How does that manager address a disaster one-on-one?
It's a good question. I think listening is always the best thing that you can do. You don't, listening and not reacting is number one. It allows the person to feel heard and hopefully understood. It also saves you from making a rash call on what you actually should do. If you are in fact the problem, probably the thing that you should do is, after you hear them out, reflect, think about what they said, and if you need help figuring out how to address it, reach out to a trusted partner, be that a people partner, your lead, etc., to think through how to respond. It's completely okay in that kind of situation to say to a person, thank you for sharing that. That's a lot to think about. Let me do some thinking and reflecting and get back to you. Like it's completely okay to leave a conversation there.
Yeah, so this question came up too, and it's almost the same question, kind of in a different form here. Because what if you found out you were the problem from one of these anonymous employee surveys? How do you address these concerns if they're anonymous? You can't really sit one-on-one with that person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a failure of feedback not happening, right? I find it really difficult to do something about like a survey bomb. Like, I think that you can take it at face value and keep it in mind in terms of how you might be perceived, but without being able to have an actual feedback conversation with a person, it's really hard to engage in that. And I think it's okay to not really engage in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, every session we've had, you guys have been following along. We're doing real world context here. A lot of times people right now are in hybrid situations, right? They have hybrid teams. So how do we handle that struggle to communicate with this in-person team, the hybrid team? How do we make that a little bit more seamless without burdening everyone with more meetings?
Yeah. So let me make sure I understand the question. Is it basically like how do you continue to have these high trust relationships in a hybrid environment where meeting face to face in person isn't possible regularly? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So have your teams at home, have some person. You see, it's a lot easier sometimes to touch a person if you're the same office as them. But what if your team's kind of um, a little bit spaced apart?
That's a great question. I recently had a long conversation with a friend of mine who was leading distributed experience at Meta on this topic, and couple takeaways, some from my own experience, some from our conversation. Number one, I think even in that hybrid, distributed team environment, even if you can't get together on a regular basis, I think it is important to do it on a, quarterly or whatever is the cadence that is possible between budget and life commitments. But I do think it is, I think it's very difficult to have a relationship that is 100% remote where people never get together. I think it is important to find time where you can have some a week or whatever it is together to build off of that. Where that's not possible, I think what Meta found in their distributed work experience, which I found really interesting, is they did a bunch of analyses on, first of all, who are people's sort of like organic networks, who do they talk to more, who do they trust, and really helping develop those. They also did some investment into, okay, when I see you in person, I might notice, a logo, I don't know, like a picture on your t-shirt or a picture of your kids. Like it's easier to pick up on something to bond about and talk about. And so they actually invested in, how do I demonstrate that and how do I show that online? How can we have employees show reflections about who they are as people, and make it really easy to discover that through internal profiles, messenger icons, things like that. And they found that to be a value add.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a great point. Last question, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Suppose my team member, I love this because suppose a team member is frequently sharing ideas and suggestions. I would kind of attribute that to your crazy meetings. But some of them aren't feasible for the projects. How can you actively listen to their input while also kind of managing their expectations there?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And I think it comes down to, be honest, say that's such an interesting idea. Uh, let's talk through, like why it might be difficult now. What's a smaller version of that we could do? What's an experimental version of that we can do? If it's really not possible, and sometimes it's not, I think it's completely reasonable to say that was such a great idea. It's really creative. Wish we could implement it. Can't right now, but like, it was really helpful to still hear it. I think it's completely reasonable to just give feedback and thank people for sharing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Marina, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I will, give you the rest of your day back, but we want to say thank you for joining us. And guys, if you have any questions about Marina's talk at all today, feel free to keep chatting. We can go ahead and follow up with you afterwards after the summit.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Great to meet you all.